Holy Wallowa, was there a lot of talent, high school talent on campus in Eugene, Oregon this weekend for their Junior Day visit weekend. Kobe Savage is off to the National Football League, and there's going to be a young safety that's going to step up and play next to Dillon Thieneman, who are some of the contenders. And speaking of young players, who are some players? I've got 4 of them from the class of 2024 or 2025 recruiting classes that could step up and play an impact role for the Ducks in 25. This is TSO Dub. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaBrue. Happy Tuesday to everybody out there. It is January 28th, 2025. Now, if the dates for spring practice are similar-ish to what they were on the calendar last season, we are within 2 months until the start of spring practice for the Oregon Ducks. This thing flies by, folks, and we are going to have coverage here on TSO Dub leading up to spring practice. And there's some topics that we're talking about in today's show that are going to be some of the bigger battles once spring practice really gets going as well. But before players get on campus, before they're early enrollees, before they participate in spring practice, hey, you got to come on campus for something like, a Junior Day visit. And that's exactly where I want to start. It was a big weekend. 6 of the top 22 players in the On3 rankings for the class of 2026 were on campus in Eugene, Oregon, looking at Autzen Stadium, looking at all the facilities, meeting with Dan Lanning and the coaching staff to see what this Oregon football program and to see what Eugene, Oregon is all about this weekend. Some of the big notables this past weekend: Chris Henry Jr. was on campus. He's the number 1 wide receiver in the country, number 5 overall player. Brandon Arrington, an athlete. Oregon is recruiting him as a corner right now. The number 8 overall player at linebacker, Tyler Atkinson, the number 9 overall player. A lot of these guys are 5 stars. Bunch of 5 stars on campus. Whole lot of stars on campus this past weekend for the Oregon Ducks. Blaine Bradford was a safety, the number 14 overall prospect. He was talking to this Oregon coaching staff and everybody around. So I don't have any insider information. If you want to go look at interviews and kind of reaction to some of these kids on campus, go check out Scoop Duck. Go check out 247. Go check out Duck Sports Authority as a part of the Rivals Network. They've got all of that coverage. But I want to send out kind of one quick thought on this Junior Day weekend and how they kind of structured it. And it's the last 2 players on that list. For those of you watching on video, for those of you listening on audio, it's tight end Keandre Harrison, the tight end, the number 16 overall player, and Cody Green, the Matter Day kid at tackle, the number 22 overall player. As I said, these are Oregon Duck commitments. I feel as a coaching staff, if you're a head coach, if you're a coordinator, if you're a position coach, sometimes in a recruitment where you're talking to these players a lot, and you're making your pitches and you're doing your thing, right? There's, I think, just a certain point you can go to. But for guys that see the vision, Keandre Harrison, a commitment, sees the vision. Cody Green, a commitment, sees the vision. And then for these kind of players to talk to each other peer-to-peer and to have a couple of commitments on campus, and I think there were other commitments besides those 2 that were on campus as well, but for them to be able to talk to some of these other players, these 5 stars that are uncommitted, that are taking all those visits and say, this is why you should come to Oregon. This is why I came to Oregon, to be able to have that, to be able to kind of elbow the guy next to you and say, yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Let's all do this together. It's creating the roots and really extending the tentacles, so to speak, of what Oregon is able to do from a recruiting standpoint. So to be able to have guys that see that and that have committed to that, and then to be able to talk to some of these other kids and maybe compare it to some of these other programs, it's great to have that all come together. It seems that, hey, having a couple of commitments on campus that are already bought into Oregon, hey, it certainly can't hurt. Let's move on to the next topic at hand. It was revealed yesterday on Instagram and Twitter by Kobe Savage himself that he is officially declaring for the NFL draft. Now, I know a lot of people, when we bring up the name Kobe Savage, a lot of people are going to look at the last thing that they saw when they saw number 5 in the green and yellow play on a football field in front of them. It was the Rose Bowl. He got turned around by Jeremiah Smith. He got turned around by this Ohio State team. A lot of people this season got turned around by Jeremiah Smith, and it was obviously not the best performance for Kobe Savage this season. But I want to say something quickly about Kobe before we kind of get into what life is going to look like in the Oregon secondary next season. Kobe Savage came into this team, and he filled a vital role in 1 year. 64 tackles. He was third on the team in tackles. He had 3 tackles for loss this season. He was a really good presence in coming up and playing the run game. And when you looked at his tape at Kansas State and how that could possibly translate over to Oregon, it makes sense that that was a really big part of his game. Oregon needs to continue to get better in pass coverage at that safety position to not allow some of these bigger plays over the top as well. And now that opens the second part of this, and this is really creating the bridge to the last segment of the show where I talk about the young impact players this season, because it all starts with this position. Now you got everybody cleared out. You're going to have 5 in and 5 out. I call it a line change going on in this Oregon secondary right now. Dillon Thieneman, the transfer over from Purdue. Of course, he is going to play. He is going to start at one of those safety spots. Who's going to fill the gap that Kobe Savage may or may not have filled in 2025? Let's kind of go over some of the key contenders, and let's kind of give maybe some of their strengths, what they provide in this position battle, because this safety battle is going to be, I think, one of the most important and one of the biggest battles throughout spring practice for the Oregon Ducks, certainly. Now, the one guy in this group that's a true freshman is Trey McNutt. And I think out of all of these guys, when all of these careers are done at Oregon, Trey McNutt could have the best career. I think he has the highest ceiling out of all of these guys. Now, that does not mean that he is going to come in and he's going to start for 12, 13, 14, however many games the Oregon Ducks play next season. One point that I want to make when I'm going to talk about these young impact players here in just a minute, it has been proven. It is very difficult with all of the talent that Dan Lanning brings into recruiting and guys that develop over their time at Oregon, and then some of the transfers that he brings in to plug some of these holes as well. It is very difficult to play as a true freshman at the University of Oregon. That being said, I do think Trey McNutt is going to be in this battle. I'm not sure if he's going to win the battle, but he is certainly going to have a say who starts at safety next to Dillon Thieneman next season. Let's talk about Peyton Woodyard a little bit. If there is maybe a favorite, it could be Peyton Woodyard, right? Because all of these other guys were on this team last season. Peyton Woodyard played in all 14 games for the Oregon Ducks last season. He totaled 9 tackles. Like I said, it's really hard to come in to Eugene, Oregon and play. Now, Peyton Woodyard, of course, I said he did play in every game for the Oregon Ducks last season. Did not play a lot, right? In a lot of those games, I know he's at safety, but when you tally the amount of tackles that he did, that might kind of show you, the amount of time that he played throughout the course of last season. But when I see the coaches kind of giving the nod to him over maybe some of these other guys that were on the roster last season, I think that experience could, not saying it will, could tell a lot that maybe Peyton Woodyard could be the leader in the clubhouse when this thing starts. One maybe complaint about Oregon over the years, and they're getting a lot better at this. You see what they're doing, recruiting secondary players. They have been, over the course of time, a smaller secondary. They maybe lack the size. They maybe lack the length of some of these guys that's needed in coverage. There's a guy in this group by the name of Kingston Lopa that he's not small, I'll tell you that much. And if they're looking for a lot of length back there at that position, Kingston Lopa is a guy you might look to. 6'5", 200 pounds, really like his length, really like his size. He's certainly going to be in the mix as well at that specific position. I think you got to look at Aaron Flowers in this group as well. Ife Obadegwu will also maybe be in this conversation as well. He was recruited as a corner. I think he could maybe go into safety as well. I think there's guys, not just him, but I think there's other guys that maybe could kind of shift around position-wise to get the right 5 for this Oregon Ducks team this season. Now, I will say this. Whoever it's going to be, and it could not just be one guy, it could be a rotational piece, but whoever emerges as the safety next to Dillon Thieneman in this battle is going to be one of the top young impact players for the Oregon Ducks next season. That's going to be an important position, and they're going to be able to learn from a guy who's been all Big Ten for 2 years in Dillon Thieneman. That's going to be an NFL safety in the future. So I think that will certainly help as well. So whoever wins this battle is going to be one of the top impact young players for the Oregon Ducks next season, which kind of lays the bridge to the last segment of today's show. Now, I'm going to leave these guys kind of off to the side because I already talked about them, but I've got 4 other young players. Now, when I talk young players, it's guys from the recruiting class of 2024 or the recruiting class of 2025. I've got 4 young players that I really think could come into this thing and make an impact, whether it's starting every game or whether it's in maybe a backup role where they get onto the field sparingly, but they can certainly come onto the field and make an impact and maybe determine which way a game may or may not go. You can't start talking about this without talking about Dorian Moore, the true freshman, the all-everything. CBS Sports put out a rankings, I guess, of projecting who are going to be the top 10 wide receivers in college football. Number 10 on that list, you guessed it, the guy that has played exactly 0 college football snaps out of Duncanville, Texas, Mr. Dorian Moore. I think what Jeremiah Smith did last season at Ohio State is maybe paving a little bit of these expectations for Dorian Moore this season. But I think Dorian is going to be able to come in and be ultra successful from the word go. And like I said before about true freshmen, it is very difficult to come into a place like Oregon and be successful right away and have these type of day one expectations. But Dorian Moore has these type of day one expectations. What he was able to do with that punt return in the Under Armour All-American game and that great catch in the Polynesian Bowl. You see some of these social media highlight clips that a lot of people are now seeing. And if they haven't seen the Duncanville tape, I advise you to go watch it. It is fantastic. It's more than just great speed on a punt return. It's more than just a one-handed catch in the mountains of Hawaii. Okay, there's a lot more to Dorian Moore's game than just those 2 specific plays. You go look at his Duncanville tape, and you see why a lot of people expect him to play a big role, similar to what Jeremiah Smith did this last year at Ohio State. 5'11", 182, consensus 5-star, the number 1 wide receiver in this 2025 class. Now, I think a big reason why Dorian is going to have a lot of success, I think it's what's around him. Of course, you have a very talented quarterback in Dante Moore that's going to be able to get him the football. And I think a guy like Dorian Moore is going to help Dante Moore out to be more productive as well as a quarterback. But here's the thing about Dorian, and maybe this was kind of a little bit of a reason why Jeremiah Smith was also successful at Ohio State this past season. You've got Evan Stewart, who can be a 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown type of guy on the outside. You've got Kenyon Sadiq, who's going to be one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten next season. Like, you've got other targets that defenses are going to have to focus on. And I think that's going to allow really favorable and advantageous matchups for Dorian Moore. And then when the defense shades in Dorian Moore's direction, that allows really good matchups for Evan Stewart and Kenyon Sadiq and some of these other players in the passing game certainly as well. So, yeah, you can't talk about this kind of list without talking about Dorian Moore. I mean, I've already talked about him a lot on the brief history of this show already, and I'm going to continue to talk about him because, whoo, baby, there's a lot of excitement. More to more. Start printing that merch, baby. Now, when we talk about this pass game, feel really good about Evan Stewart. Feel really good about Dorian Moore coming in. Feel really good about Kenyon Sadiq at tight end. There's kind of one other spot that needs to be filled, and that's where I want to go with my second young impact player, and it's another wide receiver from the class of 2024 by the name of Jeremiah McClellan. Outside of Stewart, outside of Moore, there is going to be a big competition. I talked about the competition that's going to be going on at the safety position. I think this third wide receiver is going to be a big-time competition. Jeremiah McClellan, 6 foot, 190, Under Armour All-American, consensus 4-star, top 100 kid when he came out in the class of 2024. He played in 4 games this season, had 3 catches for 24 yards. He's going to be competing with the Jerion Dickies, with the Kyler Caspers, with the Justice Lowe's, with the Gary Bryant Jr.'s. Now, when I look at that list of names and kind of what we've seen from a lot of these guys now, we've seen injury problems from Kyler Casper and Jerion Dickey maybe hold back their career certainly so far, but when I look at the ceilings out of all of these guys, I think Jeremiah McClellan has the highest ceiling certainly, and kind of put the future a little bit to the side, put the future out of it. I think Jeremiah McClellan just might be the best player and most explosive out of all of these guys right now. And I think what the coach is getting him on the field last season, I know it wasn't a ton, but getting him on the field I think was important to his development certainly for this past season. I don't think McClellan is going to have huge expectations to put up huge gaudy numbers next season. So if that's the thing about impact. Impact can mean a little bit of a different thing in different situations. When you have Dorian Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, and Evan Stewart, Jeremiah McClellan is just going to be expected to make some of these plays when the defense is kind of shading in specific directions to the Moores, to the Stewarts, to the Sadiqs. You have a guy on the outside that's getting a little bit of a bigger body at Oregon. Of course, we know the speed that Jeremiah McClellan has. If you've watched his tape, you know what he can do from a point A to point B type of situation and scenario, and using that speed to create explosive plays. I think Jeremiah McClellan is the guy that I maybe deem as the favorite to get into that wide receiver 3 type of position. I don't know if he's going to go out and have 700 or 800 yards next season. I mentioned those 3 guys at the top. I think those are going to be the top 3 targets in this Oregon passing game next season. But I think Jeremiah McClellan certainly has the skill set to be an impact player next season. But even if McClellan isn't starting, I still think that he has the skill set to be able to make plays in the maybe more limited opportunities that he may have on the football field. Junior Adams praised his ability to separate from press coverage last spring. And I think he's getting a little bit of a bigger body. He's getting stronger, so he doesn't get tied up in those particular situations. I'm a big Jeremiah McClellan guy. I'm a big McClellan, Moore, and Evan Stewart guy at the wide receiver position. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the football. Let's talk about a 2024 5-star defensive lineman, 6'5", 295 pounds. Let's talk about Aiden Breeland. He was the number 16 overall player in the 24/7 Sports rankings when he came out in 2024. Okay, so you got Jamari Caldwell moving on. You got Derek Harmon moving on. There are going to be opportunities. There are going to be battles, I think, on the defensive line. Here is really what I feel sure about on the Oregon defensive line for next year. I feel sure that Mateo Uiagalelei is going to fill in the Jordan Burch spot. I feel very confident that Amari Washington is going to be playing defensive tackle next season. Beyond that, and I know Bear Alexander transferred in this season. More on that in just a little bit. But beyond those 2 guys, I think there is an opportunity for someone like an Aiden Breeland to compete for that other defensive tackle spot on this Oregon defensive line. I could see Aiden Breeland in a very similar, maybe not complete copy and paste for a couple of different reasons, but I could see Aiden Breeland in a very similar role that we saw someone like Amari Washington last season as that rotational piece on the defensive line, but that also played in every single game, and that also played a pretty significant role on that defensive line and how good that defensive line was throughout the course of the season. Like, here's the thing about Aiden. He's such a great combination of power and speed. I think that he can create advantageous matchups pass rushing against some interior defensive linemen, right? And he also has the upper body strength. He also has that upper body power to overpower guys, both at the guard position and the tackle position, to be able to get into the backfield in defending the run type of situations as well. I think he's got a very complete skill set. Word on the street is he developed a lot throughout the course of this season. I think there was a 247 Sports interview before the beginning of last season. Tony Tuioti, the defensive line coach, and some of these coaches were saying, yeah, there's a decent-sized gap, after Jamari Caldwell, after Derek Harmon, after Amari Washington, and then to the rest of the guys. But word on the street is Aiden Breeland has certainly developed a lot over time as well. There is no guarantee that Bear Alexander will slide into that spot. Look, Aiden Breeland is a 5-star talent, just like Bear Alexander is a 5-star talent. And if Bear Alexander is a depth piece this season, that's not a bad thing. And if someone like an Aiden Breeland or a Terrence Green or someone like that slides into a starting role, I have absolutely zero problem with that. Either way, I think there's going to be good depth on the defensive line going forward next season. Okay, here's one. We talked about Dorian Moore. You can't keep him off the football field. You just can't. He's got to play. I think there's one other guy on the defensive side of the football, a true freshman, that you just can't keep off the football field. I think it's Naim Offord from Birmingham, Alabama. 6'2", 185 pounds at consensus 5-star, the number 11 overall player in the 24/7 Sports composite. Now, we talked about the safety position and the guys that are maybe going to be in contention for that spot opposite of Dillon Thieneman. You look at the corner spot, they bring in Northwestern transfer Theron Johnson. You look at more experienced guys like Jaleel Florence, Sione Lalea as well. And now when I'm starting to kind of plug certain pieces into certain spots, and it kind of hits me in the face. Naim Offord could be a perfect skill set, could be a perfect frame. It could be a perfect opportunity for him to slide into that nickel spot. He's a bigger frame at 6'2", 185 pounds, as I said. And when you talk about him playing the run and that position, expecting whether they're playing slot corner, whether they're playing a little bit off the line of scrimmage, that's a position where you really like to see a guy that can play the run really well. And this guy has great vision. He reads the football really well. And man, there's some plays on tape where it just looks like he's shot out of a cannon. He is shot out of a cannon defending the run. I'm starting to maybe be team Naim Offord, playing in that slot corner, playing in that nickel spot on this Oregon defense next season. It is going to be very difficult to keep him off the football field. I think his skill set could be pretty good to that nickel spot, that 5th defensive back spot for the Oregon Ducks next season. I want to hit some honorable mentions. How about, Elijah Rushing, 6'6", 255 pounds. He was in a similar category in that 24 class with Aiden Breeland that I talked about before. A little bit of a smaller build in terms of his weight. He's going to be a little bit faster, certainly coming off the edge out of the state of Arizona. I could see him competing maybe in a backup and that depth type of role behind Tatum Tuioti with Blake Purchase. Blake Purchase and Elijah Rushing maybe providing some depth. And if Elijah Rushing is able to really step up, if he's really able to develop, you just drool when you watch his tape and you see his potential. Just like I said with Aiden Breeland, when you see his potential, you see what can truly be great from a pass rushing standpoint this season for the Oregon Ducks. If you've got Mateo Uiagalelei, if you've got Tatum Tuioti, Blake Purchase, and Elijah Rushing, and maybe some interior guys, like the Aiden Breelands that I talked about, and the Amari Washingtons, all of a sudden you start to get a little bit more excited, and a little bit more excited, and a little bit louder now, right, about this defensive line and about this pass rushing. I think the key on the defensive lines that have been really good over the past few years is you need depth and you want depth. And Elijah Rushing could provide some depth, certainly, to that pass rush unit and that defensive line. Dakota Fields is another one. He had a really nice play, a big interception in last year's spring game, certainly as well. He's going to be vying with many other players, good size, 6'2", 190 pounds at that corner spot. We'll see if he can really rise to the occasion. There's going to be a lot of competition in the defensive backfield entering this spring and certainly going in to fall camp as well. It's going to be a fun time as we kind of really start to break down these position battles as we get closer to the spring. I'm not saying these are the 4 impact players. I'm saying, hey, these are 4 players that could, and I think I'm favoring to be impact players for this season. Who do you think are going to be some impact players for the Ducks next season that are class of 2024 or class of 2025, guys? Leave all of your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Ted LeBrew. This has been That Show Out West.